Mark Glick, Chief Energy Officer, Hawaii State Energy Office. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Michael. Great to be here.
Appreciate your time. Really happy to be talking to you. I know you and I, we go way back.
Yep.
So this is your second turn as Chief Energy Officer. And you previously were under the Abercrombie administration, and some time has passed. What's changed for the role?
Yeah, so I did that, first joined the office in 2010, but I became administrator when it was a civil service position, actually, permanent, long-term, from 2011 to actually December of 2016. Went to the university for 7 years. I'm a tenured faculty member at the University of Hawaii at Manoa, the Hawaii Natural Energy Institute. And when Governor Josh Green asked me to be Chief Energy Officer, it became a cabinet level appointed position in 2019. And so when I got asked to do that, I came back in January of 2023.
Awesome. Yeah, I was really happy to see that you're appointed to that position. I really appreciate your accessibility, approachability, and warmth you bring to the role, besides the intellect and knowledge. So really happy that you're back in that role.
Well, it's really nice of you to say. I mean, I'm deeply honored that the governor asked. And if you're asked, you should step up and serve. I have a public policy background, and this is what I really love doing.
Great. Well, I know a lot has changed, in that between then and now. But one thing seems to be very consistent in our policy space, and that's the state's commitment towards clean energy. We're on this solid march towards 2045, where we're going to achieve 100% renewable energy. In fact, Ulupono, we conducted a survey earlier this year, and it found, out of the folks that we surveyed, that over 90% of the people support clean energy transition, and even more so, people support generation in their communities, which is pretty significant. So, I guess my first question to you is, how does the State Energy Office view their role in supporting that kind of mandate and carrying that ball forward?
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, first of all, that the Ulupono survey results are astounding. Really impressive, and it's something we've always felt, that people were deeply interested in sort of improving affordability and also reducing carbon. So that's always been a big deal. But affordability has really come to the forefront. And so that was critical when the governor stepped in. First, it was affordable housing, and then affordability overall. And post-Maui wildfires, one of the things he asked our office to do was come up with a plan, a realistic plan, to be able to lower costs, lower carbon, and hopefully bring in more capital, because we know from the wildfires that it was really challenging on not only our infrastructure, but on our largest utility, and that costs would likely increase as a result of that. So we're highly attuned to that, and we've been working on numerous strategies since then to address that.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I want to go back to one of the things you mentioned is cost and affordability. Earlier at the energy conference, I think a lot of folks in the energy space were a little bit surprised to hear the governor's announcement about a return to liquefied natural gas to evaluate what that impact could be, and possibly bringing that into our generation mix. For those who don't know, I guess the previous governor administration had consciously stepped away from it as an option in favor of just continuing to pursue renewables. And so, some folks were a little bit caught off guard. I know you guys weren't, because you've been kind of evaluating that work. And so really, what is the status, and what is the kind of rationale behind looking at liquefied natural gas right now?
Yeah, no, thanks for asking. I mean, part of that effort to be able to reduce carbon and reduce cost has to do with what's our current makeup. And I think one of the unintended consequences of Governor Ige's decision in 2015 to not look at other alternatives like natural gas to replace our fossil fuel usage right now means that we're locked in to low sulfur fuel oil, which is essentially residual fuel. If you looked at it, it is a fuel that looks like carbon. It's totally black. It has the consistency of wax, and the way it burns even worse in terms of greenhouse gas emissions than coal. So what that has done, it's placed Hawaii, and Oahu in particular, because it's on this island, on Oahu, where we're burning this residual oil to generate 68% or 67% of all of our electricity is coming from that fuel currently. It'll diminish over time as we get more renewables, but it will not completely go away until 2045. So we're going to continue to burn this. That has placed Hawaii #1 in terms of carbon impacts, carbon emissions out of the 50 states. So essentially the governor said that's unacceptable. So that is in the current integrated grid plan, is essentially maintaining that low sulfur fuel oil, largely because the policy decisions that were made in 2015. The governor said, let's look at everything. Let's look at analysis. Let's compare the life cycle emissions of all alternatives that are available in the market, and also the cost implications of those.
Right.
But make sure there are guardrails around when that can be used. Only during the time that we would be burning fossil fuels. As we phase out fossil fuels, make sure that nothing impedes, in fact, hopefully accelerates the pace of renewable integration. So those are the rules, the guidelines the governor set forth. So anything we're looking at through this analysis that we're completing by the end of this month, we'll have the first interim results of that, and we'll be able to release that. Natural gas is among those that were considered because that is publicly available and it's very low carbon and lower cost than residual fuel. So you might expect that to show up prominently in the analytical results.
Right. It's great that you mentioned cost too, because I do think that that's an important component that probably gets overlooked with some of this too, is there is an opportunity to pay less for the same energy. One question that's stuck with some of us in the energy field is related to kind of the stickiness of those investments. So if we need to make investments in order to convert our generation mix to enable liquefied natural gas to be used, what the concern would be is that going into the future, if we are going to ramp it down, we've made all those investments, there will be pressure, I would imagine, from everybody. Let's continue to utilize that infrastructure that we paid so much for. So what do you say to that in terms of what the Energy Office, I'm sure you're accounting for that. How do you conceive of the best way to address that?
Yeah, I mean, what you're really describing is what would be considered a bridge fuel, something that would be an interim step towards renewables. I think the preference is that you skip that interim step, you go directly to renewables. Let's assume that we pursue renewables at the grandest pace, we accelerate that pace, we do certain additional things, and we can talk a little bit about what those could be. Those will be part of, I think, an action item list that the governor will present as well of ways to move our energy transition forward. But if you do that, and you have this step where you're using a lower carbon, lower price fuel, how do you ensure that that fuel and the infrastructure doesn't get locked in further, or that you get stuck with stranded costs, costs that you have to pay off over the time. So our analysis actually looks at it in very short-term windows, 10 to 15-year windows. That basically those investments have to be not only fully paid off, but if there's any infrastructure that's associated with the fossil-oriented part of the fuel, that goes away. Like in natural gas, there's things called floating regas units. That's where you can actually gather the natural gas and then move it onshore. Those can actually be done on floating systems that can be moored, just like our current offload of petroleum is, and those can actually go away over time. You can either lease them to make sure that the investments are short-term, or you can purchase them and then sell them, and they can go away. So we would also want to have policy guardrails that would perhaps even to greater extent than they currently do, say that you can't keep this kind of infrastructure, that must go away.
Right.
I think the governor would insist upon, if there's any sort of consideration of a bridge strategy, I think the governor would insist on those things being in place, because he's firmly committed to us being as energy self-sufficient and energy secure with our own renewable resources as possible.
That's great. And I think, you know, some of the concern would be also just that if the infrastructure is there, would it potentially be used as a biofuel? You know, there is some value in having, you know, rotational spinning mass and part of generation mix. Does it make sense to look at biofuels as a potential, you know, solution for future use of that infrastructure? I guess the main concern with that is the cost and sourcing, right? So, do you have any, you know, is that part of the evaluation that you guys are looking at all, or are you really looking to just phase it out?
So our analysis that we're currently doing is called a low carbon fuels and repowering analysis. And so what that's looking at is essentially the power plants. You know, we look at, let's say, the recent shortages of energy that have caused rolling blackouts here on Oahu, and that have just in the last few months done similar things on Hawaii Island. That's really a symptom of old power plants, 50, 60, 70 years old, that are really beyond their life. And so those need to be replaced. Your point is, will they be replaced with something that we can transition to that are the end game solutions? Our analysis does take that in consideration, and we're looking at precisely the broader palette that you raise, things that create inertia at the very end game. Those are things called synchronous condensers. Those need to be convertible from any new power plant that comes into existence. Those things are, so far they haven't actually been part of the current RFPs or the previous RFPs for new power. They've been explained as biofuels capable, and we think it needs to go far beyond that. They need to be biofuels, biodiesel capable, hydrogen capable, really good new high efficiency combined cycle turbines can run on hydrogen today. And there's not the availability of hydrogen to run them today, but they can run it. Some of them are built so they can do that, or at least high percentages of hydrogen. So we need to specify that, and that they also be convertible to these synchronous condensers. For those people that don't know what that is, that's just simply a power producer that no longer is moving energy, it just spins and it creates inertia, which is essentially what a power plant does. A typical thermal power plant creates that kind of inertia in the system that creates the stability, and it maintains that the appropriate 60 hertz frequency throughout the system. Those are now proven technologies that are growing, and we want to make sure that anything that we're doing to repower actually has that long-term capability, and that we're using fuels now and in the future that are lower carbon, lower cost, to move us in that direction. So that's the way we've looked at it, and that's what we'll be presenting to the public later this month.
That's great. Looking forward to reading that.
Yeah.
I'm sure a lot went into it. And talking about technologies, talking about looking into the future, a lot has been mentioned and discussed about geothermal lately.
Yes.
Geothermal, we have potential for a significant resource. We have one example on Hawaii Island right now of an active geothermal plant. But lately there's been policy movement to bring more money for exploration, as well as looking to expand and find the resources in not only on Hawaii Island, but other locations throughout the state as well, which is really encouraging. And I just wanted to know from the state's perspective, who's leading in that effort, and also kind of if you have any status update on where things are at right now.
Well, it's such a big initiative that I think you'll have a coordinated effort throughout the administration. But the governor has really changed the game in the area of geothermal, basically saying if we want to be energy self-sufficient, we need to be taking a harder look at geothermal. we need to really put it back on the table. As you mentioned, Puna Geothermal Ventures is really the only game in town. It has had challenges, particularly with the public in the Puna district, but it also has been operating successfully. I think a lot of people missed it when the volcano surrounded it and it had to be shut down. It came back. It's now producing slightly less than it was before then, about 30 megawatts. But they have approval to put in new equipment to basically, in the same footprint, be able to produce as much as 48 megawatts. That went through an environmental impact statement process, was approved, and so that is moving forward. But I think in order for there to be truly any possibility for that to grow, first, it's a public trust resource that has to be, treated extremely carefully in terms of public acceptance and also willingness to be able to use that public trust resource for the purpose of energy production. And so we have taken on a twofold effort in the administration. One is to conduct the community engagement that's necessary to do that from the beginning, well before any specific location for development is identified. The question is where, how can this be done in an acceptable fashion? So we've hired Pakai consulting firm, Pakai, to work with us to have those discussions with the community in the right way. And we're very excited to do that. We'll have those discussions in Hawaii Island, in Maui, where there's potential, and even here in Oahu, where there is potential for, maybe not full utility scale generation, but maybe for cooling, because of the differential that can come from the temperature of that's underground of water, and to be able to use that appropriately. So we want to explore that and figure out how to do it right. But then secondly, we also have to understand where is the resource. So that can be done with research far before development, and that's done through slim hole resource assessments. And we can work with the University of Hawaii and others to do that. Governor's already provided $5 million for some initial slim hole resource assessments. Basically, that just does a very slim hole to look at water temperature. And it also allows us to look at the formations to see whether or not we can sequester carbon, safely and effectively. So we learn a lot from that. Those are the first steps. And then again, with a public sort of guidance and acceptance, then maybe we'll take steps beyond that.
I'm really glad you brought up community engagement. I think it's so critical. The atmosphere has changed quite a bit. It should have been probably this way from the beginning. Right. However, it hasn't been. But now it seems like everybody's taking it much more seriously. There's some great examples of community-led energy planning, I know, which Energy Office has been deeply involved in. I applaud you folks for that. And you personally, you've continued that mantle from your previous role forward, and it's really making an impact, and so really appreciate that. And with community in mind, you mentioned Maui, heartbreaking loss, such a eye-opening moment in terms of impact of climate here in Hawaii, but also how we handle energy and what things we need to do to mitigate, adapt, but also be more resilient in the state when it comes to everything, all of our infrastructure, but energy in particular. And one of the things that Hawaiian Electric has implemented is their public safety power shutoff, the PSPS. And I know right now they're doing kind of a public tour, talking to potentially affected communities to talk about what it's going to be like, how it's going to work, what those impacts could be. And what we're starting to see is that there's a lot of secondary effects that may be coming, folks who need to make a lot of adjustments. Other utility providers or other big service providers, water, wastewater, fire, all those entities need to make investments now to build up resiliency and redundancy as a result. So with that in mind, how are you seeing this new dynamic, this new dimension that we're all facing regarding public safety and that interplay between that and energy service?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a really great point that Hawaiian Electric has responded, has acted, has put in place something that can shut off power before it could create another Lahaina. So there's positive aspects to that, but as you said, there's a lot of unintended consequences to healthcare, to people on dialysis and all of that. So all of that has to be carefully thought through. My perspective is that the way that it's been rolled out, mostly to leeward locations that are at higher risk, is wise, and I think there was a great expectation to get something in place before this fire season. So kudos to them for ramping that up. But I do think that we have to look at long-term solutions that have much less impact. And one of the things that we worked very closely with Hawaiian Electric and KIUC on were a whole set of sensors and other sophisticated controllers that can sense a fault, can shut down the system before a power line falls and hits the ground. Those are the elegant long-term solutions. Mm-hmm. So I think you'll see a lot of that investment, and we're seeking right now federal support to do that. We were unsuccessful in one of our bids for an extremely large project of that type, but we've added some additional federal funding requests, and we hope to get some of those approved. We will be pushing hard to the Department of Energy to get support for that. But I think those solutions are really the ultimate solutions. Mm-hmm. But I think the PSPS is probably a short-term measure, I think of it more of a short-term measure to provide kind of a strong arm safety plug in the event that something becomes really clearly known through data and through their own sensing devices that we're likely to get hit, shut it down, but it is really going to be, when you shut it down in advance, it does have a lot of impacts, like you said.
Yep. And to be fair, other places are dealing with the same thing, and everyone's just trying stuff out right now, and I think ultimately we're going to have to keep working to find the right kind of mix of technology and other solutions that will fit for our dynamic grid needs. Well, thank you so much. I have one last question. This is kind of more broad back. I appreciate your time today. As we continue to transition more sustainable energy future, what are the key priorities and goals for you and for the Energy Office to be successful while you're in that role?
Thank you, Michael. Again, it's such an honor to be in this position, particularly now, and particularly to be able to support Governor Josh Green and his extraordinary effectiveness in being able to communicate to the public. For us, it's about reducing costs, reducing carbon, trying to bring in more capital. We're going to be doing also things, I think, to accelerate the energy transition. We're going to be trying to cover all the rooftops on Oahu and be able to export that energy back. So far, the policy's been to right-size things. We think that we're going to have to use all of those rooftops to be able to cover that in both commercial and residential space. We will continue to move that geothermal agenda forward to be more energy self-sufficient and hopefully long-term to reduce costs. And we will continue to look for investments that will improve the resilience of the system by upgrading these power plants and the grid sort of connections and distribution system that essentially over time has degraded significantly. So those are definitely frontline issues. We'll have other acceleration measures, and one thing that never gets talked about much, there will be a whole host of also energy efficiency measures to try to reduce load, reduce demand. At the same time, we're going to be increasing demand because we're going to have more electric vehicles on the road. We certainly didn't even talk about clean transportation, but the electric vehicle revolution will continue to be part of that, as well as hydrogen for heavy duty vehicles and for buses.
Yeah, we did. There's so much more to talk about.
So much.
We could have you on for another several podcasts to talk about all this stuff. But for now, I'd like to thank you for joining us. I really appreciate your time, and look forward to speaking with you again in the future.
I loved it. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Mark.